Once, in a kingdom where the mountains touched the clouds and the rivers ran silver under the moonlight, there lived a princess who broke every rule her crown demanded of her. Her name was Elara, and one night, when the entire palace was fast asleep, she slipped out of her chamber, past the sleeping guards, through a door no one knew existed, and what she did that night changed the fate of an entire kingdom forever. Have you ever wondered if the smallest act of kindness could stop the biggest disaster from happening? Elara did more than wonder. She found out, and by the time the sun rose over Veloria the next morning, nothing would ever be the same again. Stay with me, because this is a story you will not forget. Welcome back to our channel, where we bring you magical tales of courage, kindness, and the quiet heroes who change the world one small step at a time. If you love stories like this, full of heart, mystery, and a touch of magic, do not forget to hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you never miss a new story from us. And before we begin, tell us in the comments, which state in the USA are you watching from today? We would love to know where our story is reaching tonight. Now, let's step into the kingdom of Veloria. Veloria was a kingdom unlike any other. It sat between two great mountain ranges, its capital city built from pale golden stone that seemed to glow at sunset. Fields of wheat stretched for miles beyond the palace walls, and a wide, winding river cut through the heart of the land, feeding villages, orchards, and quiet forests where deer wandered freely. From the outside, Veloria looked like a paradise. Travelers who passed through often said it was the most beautiful kingdom they had ever seen. Towers wrapped in ivy, marketplaces bursting with color, and a castle that rose like a crown of stone against the sky. But beauty, as Elara would soon learn, could hide many secrets. The royal family had ruled Veloria for generations. King Aldrich was a fair man, though weighed down by tradition and the endless demands of ruling a kingdom. Queen Rosalind was gentle but cautious, always reminding her daughter of what a princess should and should not do. And then there was Elara, 16 years old, sharp-eyed, endlessly curious, and possessing a heart far too big for the strict rules of palace life. From a young age, Elara had never quite fit the mold expected of her. While other nobles' daughters practiced needlework and etiquette, Elara would sneak off to the stables to talk with the horse keepers, or wander the kitchen gardens, asking the cooks about their families. She had a habit, one that worried her mother greatly, of noticing people others overlooked. The elderly gatekeeper with tired eyes. The young servant girl who flinched at loud noises. The beggar children who lingered near the palace gates, hoping for scraps. Lately, though, something felt wrong in Veloria. Whispers moved through the palace halls like a cold draft. The harvests had been poor for 2 seasons in a row. Taxes, strangely, had not been lowered to match the hardship. In fact, they had quietly increased. And in the villages beyond the palace walls, illness was spreading faster than anyone in the royal court seemed willing to admit. The nobles, of course, noticed nothing. Their tables remained full, their halls remained warm, and their conversations rarely strayed beyond the latest fashions arriving from neighboring kingdoms or the grand new wing being added to the eastern side of the palace. It was easy, Elara had come to realize, to ignore suffering when it never had to knock on your own door. She often thought about how strange it was that a kingdom could look so perfect from a distance and yet hide so much beneath its surface. The golden stone walls that tourists admired were the very same walls that separated the privileged from the struggling. The river that fed the royal gardens with sparkling water was the same river that, further downstream, had grown murky and unsafe for the villagers who depended on it daily. Elara noticed. She always noticed. And what she would discover in the days ahead would test everything she thought she knew about her kingdom, her family, and herself. It began on an ordinary afternoon, the kind that felt like every other day in the palace. Lessons in history, a walk through the royal gardens, a quiet dinner with her parents. But as Elara stood by her window that evening, watching the sun dip behind the mountains, she noticed something unusual near the palace gates. A small figure, hunched and trembling, was being turned away by the guards. Elara leaned closer to the window and saw it clearly now, a boy no older than 8, his clothes little more than rags, his arms far too thin. He was begging not for gold, but for medicine. His voice, faint but desperate, carried up through the evening air. "Please," he said, "my sister is sick. We have no money. Just a little medicine, that's all we need." The guard's response was firm and cold. "The palace does not distribute medicine to villagers. Go to the healer's quarter in town." "We already went," the boy cried. "They said we owe too much already. Please, just this once." But the guard had already turned away, and the boy was left standing alone at the gates, shoulders shaking, before he finally turned and disappeared into the darkening streets. Elara stood frozen at her window, her heart pounding. She had heard rumors of hardship in the villages, but seeing it, hearing that boy's voice crack with desperation, was something entirely different. It was no longer a rumor. It was real, and it was happening just beyond her window while she sat in a warm room, safe and fed. That night, she could not sleep. She thought of her father's endless meetings about kingdom matters, meetings she was never allowed to attend. She thought of her mother's gentle but firm reminder from that very morning: a princess must never involve herself directly with the common folk, Elara. It is not proper. It is not safe. But how, Elara wondered, could safety matter more than a sick child needing medicine? She sat on the edge of her bed, torn between two versions of herself: the obedient princess raised to follow rules, and the girl who could not simply look away from suffering. The rules told her to stay. Her heart told her to go. By midnight, her heart had won. Elara moved quietly through her chamber, her hands trembling slightly as she reached beneath her bed for a bundle she had hidden there weeks earlier: a plain woolen dress, worn boots, and a dark cloak, items she had borrowed from a laundry cart out of nothing more than curiosity. Tonight, that curiosity would finally serve a purpose. She removed her silk nightgown and pulled on the simple dress instead, tying her long hair back with a strip of cloth. Looking into the mirror, she barely recognized herself, and that, she realized, was exactly what she needed. The palace at night was a maze of shadows and candlelight, patrolled by guards who marched the same routes at the same hours, night after night, year after year. Elara had spent years watching those patterns without even realizing she was memorizing them. Now, that knowledge would be her guide. She slipped out of her room and down a servant's staircase rarely used after dark. Her heart hammered in her chest as she pressed herself against the cold stone wall, waiting as two guards passed by, their lantern light flickering across the corridor just inches from where she hid. When the coast was clear, she moved quickly toward the old garden wall, where a section of ivy hid a narrow gap she had discovered as a child, back when she used to sneak out simply to watch the stars from the hillside. Tonight, that same gap would lead her somewhere far more important. Squeezing through the opening, scraping her arms slightly against the stone, Elara finally emerged on the other side of the palace wall, free, unseen, and completely alone in the dark for the very first time in her life. The village beyond the palace looked nothing like the polished streets she sometimes glimpsed from her carriage. The narrow lanes were unpaved, muddy from recent rain. Small wooden homes leaned against each other, as if holding one another up. A thin, sour smell of sickness lingered in the air. She walked carefully, following the direction she had seen the boy run earlier that evening, asking a passing woman in a low voice if she knew a sick girl and her brother nearby. The woman, wrapping her own shawl tighter against the night chill, pointed down a narrow alley. "The Hensley family, third house on the left. But there's no use going there, dear. They have nothing left to give." "I'm not going to take anything," Elara said quietly. "I'm going to give." The Hensley home was small, barely more than a single room with a low fire struggling to stay lit in the hearth. Elara knocked softly, and after a long pause, the same boy from the palace gates opened the door, his eyes widening in surprise at the sight of a stranger. "I'm not here to hurt you," Elara said gently, kneeling to meet his eyes. "I heard your sister is sick. I brought something that might help." From beneath her cloak, she withdrew a small pouch. Inside it, a vial of medicine she had carefully taken from the palace's own healing stores, along with several gold coins she had saved from her personal allowance over the months, coins she had never quite known what to do with until now. The boy, whose name she soon learned was Tomas, led her inside where his younger sister, Mira, lay on a thin mattress near the fire, her small body trembling with fever. Their mother sat beside her, exhaustion etched deeply into her face, looking up in confusion at the stranger who had suddenly appeared in her doorway. "Who are you?" the mother asked, her voice caught between suspicion and desperate hope. "A friend," Elara said simply. "Just someone who couldn't walk away." She knelt beside Mira and, with careful hands, helped administer the medicine, speaking softly to calm the frightened child. As the fever slowly began to ease and Myra's breathing steadied, the mother wept quietly, clutching Elara's hand. "Why would you do this for strangers?" she asked. "You could have kept walking. No one would have known." Elara considered the question for a long moment. "I would have known," she finally said. "And that would have been enough to break my heart." As she prepared to leave, Tomas tugged gently at her sleeve. "Are you an angel?" he asked wide-eyed. Elara smiled, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "No," she said softly. "Just a girl who believes no child should suffer while others do nothing." But before she left, the mother said something that stopped Elara cold. "This sickness and the poverty, it's gotten so much worse since the new taxes began. The tax collectors say the crown ordered it to fund something important, but no one will tell us what. Meanwhile, our children go hungry." Elara's chest tightened. Her father had never mentioned new taxes to her, let alone their true purpose. Something deeper was happening in Veloria, something being hidden, even from her. She left the Hensley home with far more questions than answers, and a growing determination burning in her chest. This was not the end of her secret journey. It was only the beginning. Walking back through the narrow lanes toward the palace wall, Elara passed other homes with flickering candlelight in their windows, and she found herself wondering how many other Miris were lying feverish behind those thin wooden doors, how many other Tomases were standing at gates being turned away. The scale of it overwhelmed her for a moment, and she had to stop and steady herself against a low stone fence, breathing slowly under the moonlight. It would have been easy, she realized, to convince herself that one act of kindness was enough, that she had done her part for the night and could return to her warm bed with a clear conscience. But something inside her refused to settle for that. If one family's suffering had been hidden from her so completely, what else had been hidden? What other truths lay just beyond the polished walls of the world she had always known? She made a quiet promise to herself that night, standing alone in the dark. She would not stop at one visit. She would keep coming back, keep learning, keep helping, no matter how many nights it took, no matter what rules she had to break to do it. As she finally slipped back through the gap in the garden wall and made her way to her chamber, the first hints of dawn were beginning to color the eastern sky. She was exhausted, her boots caked in mud, her cloak damp with the night air. But for the first time in a long while, she felt something close to purpose settle over her, steady and unshakable. Over the following weeks, Elara returned to the village again and again, each night slipping through the same gap in the garden wall. She brought medicine when she could, food when she could gather it, and most importantly, she listened. She learned the names of families struggling under the weight of unexplained taxes. She heard stories of illness spreading due to contaminated water near the lower village, a problem the royal engineers had apparently known about for months, but had done nothing to fix. Slowly, something remarkable began to happen. Word spread through the village, not of a princess, for no one yet knew her true identity, but of a mysterious, kind stranger who appeared at night to help those in need. Inspired, some villagers began helping each other in ways they hadn't before. A baker began setting aside bread for struggling families. A retired healer began treating the sick for free, splitting the cost of supplies with neighbors who could still afford to give a little. Kindness, Elara realized, was contagious in the very best way. At the same time, her nightly visits revealed a troubling pattern. The extra taxes were not funding hospitals or infrastructure, as the crown had claimed. Instead, they seemed to be lining the pockets of a single powerful advisor, Lord Reginald Voss, a man who had gained significant influence over King Aldrich in recent years, convincing him that strength projects, including a lavish new wing of the palace, were essential to Veloria's prestige. Villagers, emboldened by growing unity and frustration, began quietly organizing peaceful gatherings to demand answers from the crown. What had started as one girl's private act of compassion was slowly becoming a movement, one the palace could no longer ignore. Back within the castle walls, however, Elara's absences had not gone entirely unnoticed. A palace maid, worried after finding Elara's bed strangely arranged with pillows one night, mentioned it hesitantly to Queen Rosalind. The queen, alarmed, began watching her daughter more closely, noticing small details: mud on the hem of a hidden dress, an empty medicine vial missing from the healing stores, and unusual tiredness in Elara's eyes each morning. Even the royal guards, some of whom had begun to notice unusual activity near the old garden wall, found themselves curiously reluctant to report it. One older guard, a man named Corwin who had served the palace for over 20 years, had quietly begun leaving that section of the wall unwatched during certain hours, having glimpsed enough of Elara's late-night purpose to understand it was not something to be stopped, but something to be protected. Rumors of the night visitor reached even the marketplace, where merchants began speaking of the mysterious kindness spreading through the lower village. Some believed it to be a wandering healer. Others whispered it might be a spirit of the old forest, come to right the wrongs of the kingdom. No one imagined, not even for a moment, that the answer slept each night within the very palace walls they so rarely questioned. One evening, as Elara prepared to slip away once again, she found her mother standing quietly in the doorway of her chamber, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "I think," the queen said softly, "it's time you told me the truth." Elara froze, her hand still resting against the secret latch of her wardrobe. For a long moment, neither mother nor daughter spoke. Then, slowly, Elara lowered her hood and met her mother's gaze directly. "I couldn't stay silent anymore," Elara said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Not while children were starving and getting sick just beyond our walls, while we host lavish dinners and build new palace wings." Queen Rosalind's expression shifted through several emotions: shock, fear, and something else Elara hadn't expected: recognition. "You've been leaving the palace at night, alone. Do you understand how dangerous that is?" "I understand the danger," Elara replied firmly. "But I also understand what happens when we do nothing. A boy nearly lost his sister because we were too far removed to notice her suffering. That's not a risk I could live with." The queen was quiet for a long moment before finally sitting down on the edge of Elara's bed, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "Your father needs to know about this," she said. "All of it. The taxes, Lord Voss, the sickness in the village." That night, for the first time, Elara stood before both her parents and told them everything. Every visit, every family she had met, every injustice she had uncovered. King Aldrich listened in silence, his expression darkening with each revelation, particularly when he learned the truth about the misused tax funds under Lord Voss's guidance. "I trusted him," the king said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "I trusted him to act in the kingdom's best interest." "Perhaps," Elara said gently, "it's time the kingdom's best interest was decided by listening to the people themselves, rather than only the advisors closest to the throne." King Aldrich studied his daughter for a long moment, and slowly, something in his expression shifted from disbelief to something closer to pride. "You did what none of my advisors dared to do," he said. "You went and saw the truth with your own eyes." The following morning, Lord Voss was summoned before the king to answer for the misused funds. He tried, at first, to defend his decisions, insisting that the new palace wing would bring prestige and prosperity to Veloria for generations to come. But when King Aldrich asked him plainly whether he had ever once visited the villages to see the cost of that prosperity with his own eyes, Voss had no answer. Within days, the unnecessary taxes were repealed, and resources were redirected toward the village's contaminated water system and long overdue medical support. Queen Rosalind, too, found herself changed by the events of that week. Where once she had cautioned her daughter to stay within the safe boundaries of palace life, she now found herself quietly proud of the very disobedience she had once feared. She began accompanying Elara on daytime visits to the villages, no longer in secret, but as an open show of the crown's renewed commitment to its people. In the months that followed, Veloria began to change in ways both large and small. Clean water systems were repaired across the lower villages. A public healing house was established, offering free care to families who could not otherwise afford it. And King Aldrich, inspired by his daughter's courage, began a new tradition, a monthly open council where villagers could speak directly to the royal family about their struggles and needs. Elara no longer needed to sneak through garden walls in the dead of night. Instead, she walked openly through the villages, greeted warmly by families who now knew her not as a mysterious stranger, but as the princess who had once knelt beside a sick child's bed without hesitation. Tomas and Mira often visited the palace gardens now, running freely through the grounds that had once seemed impossibly out of reach. Mira, fully recovered, liked to tell anyone who would listen that a kind stranger had once saved her life, never fully realizing, until she was older, that the stranger and the princess were one and the same. Veloria flourished in the years that followed, remembered not for its golden towers or grand feasts, but for a kingdom that had learned, through one girl's quiet courage, to truly see its people. And so, the story of Princess Elara became legend, not because she wore a crown, but because she chose compassion over comfort, truth over silence, and courage over convenient blindness. The smallest act of kindness, sparked in the dead of night by a single determined girl, had rippled outward until it reshaped an entire kingdom. Years later, when travelers passed through Veloria and admired its golden towers and thriving marketplaces, the stories they carried away were no longer just about the beauty of the kingdom's stone walls. They spoke instead of a healing house that turned no one away, of a royal family that walked among its people, and of a princess who had once slipped through a gap in a garden wall simply because she could not bear to do nothing. Sometimes the greatest change in the world begins not with an army, or a decree, or a grand announcement, but with someone simply refusing to look away. And that is the story of Princess Elara's secret act of kindness that changed Veloria forever, a reminder that even in the quietest moments, our choices can ripple outward in ways we may never fully see. If this story touched your heart, make sure to like this video and share it with someone who needs a little reminder that kindness always matters. And if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel and hit that bell icon so you never miss one of our magical tales. Once more, we'd love to hear from you. Comment below and let us know which state in the USA you're watching from tonight. It always amazes us to see just how far these stories travel. Thank you for joining us in Veloria today. We'll see you in the next story. Until then, stay kind, stay curious, and never underestimate the power of a single good deed.